All right, hi guys, welcome to the OCD recovery channel on OCD Real Talk. And this time we have some first timers on Real Talk, but also first timers on the channel. So we obviously, Sam has done plenty of videos for the channel, and he's also done a lot of Real Talk videos. So do check out his videos. He's talked a lot about chronic guilt and shame, cheating fears, POCD. And Jade has also done extremely great videos on the channel. She's very popular. I feel like she's one of the most popular ones on the channel that we have. She gets a
Rubbish.
lot of traction. People love her videos. But it's the first time on Real Talk. And then we have Hardy. Hardy has done a few videos on the channel before, but this is his first time on a Real Talk, and it's also his first time meeting some of us on video for the first time. So say hi, Hardy.
Hey everyone.
Me and Holly have actually met in real life, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've already met Sam in person, so
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's nice.
Slightly different.
Okay, so we thought we would talk about POCD today because it is one of those themes that tends to be very controversial. People don't like talking about it a lot. It does become a bit of a touchy subject at times. So it's really important to bring awareness to it because a lot of people are still not aware that this is also an OCD theme. And so I just wanted to, because you three have suffered with that. I have never had POCD, but I've had like other forms of touches of like taboo themes here and there. So, but I just wanted to have you guys pitch in your thoughts and experience on this because generally, as we were discussing before beginning this video as well, talking about mental health struggles in itself is very difficult. And it's difficult to open up about that you're not doing well, you're doing poorly, stuff like that. And people who suffer from OCD, they don't like at times even talking about it, that they have OCD. So, but if you have a theme like this, then there is another sort of chronic guilt and shame that latches on for even having this particular theme. And it's like, why did it have to be this theme and why not any other theme? So any of you who would like to go first on just describing your experience of when you first realized that this was an OCD theme and it wasn't like you in that sense.
Happy to jump in. I lived for a very long time before I realized it was OCD. And I think that's what's quite terrifying about this theme is because you don't say you've got health concerns, OCD, it's very natural to immediately go to a loved one and say, I'm really scared I've got cancer. You can just say it straight away. You don't even worry.
Yeah.
And then when they notice that you're constantly talking about the health concern, they're like, why are they so obsessed with this? And it's probably relatively easy, though not, it's never easy to spot OCD, I think, because of the low awareness. But when there's something that you feel is so shameful that you would never want to speak and it feels real, you just kind of carry it with you. So that's, for me, it just took such a long time to even be able to talk about what was going on for me. So I think that's the big issue, is that lack of awareness of intrusive thoughts and how common they are and things like that. Sorry?
Was it relieving to be like, oh my God, this is actually a thing?
Yeah, it was like, this is a real thing. I remember the day, it was only 5 years ago. So bearing in mind that I suffered with OCD since I was 8 really, and then latched really bad at 14. It was only when I was 29. So from that age to 29, that was when a therapist mentioned harm OCD. They mentioned harm OCD to me because of the issues I was worrying about were of a taboo nature. And they're like, look into harm OCD. And yeah, when I Googled it, I was like, this is a thing. There's other people like this. There's parents who are losing their mind, who don't want to be alive anymore, describing everything I've been going through. So yeah, it was a huge relief. And I felt like, oh, there we go. I'm healed now. I'm fixed. And obviously, sadly not the case. But yeah, it's that.
Did you have kids after this realization, or like before even having this realization, you still went ahead with having kids?
So I was pregnant when I learned what OCD was, which was
Oh, okay.
a strange level of terrifying, because I don't know if anyone can relate to this with POCD, but when your mind goes into dips. So like you wake up in the morning, you think, is this going to be a good day? Is my mind going to feel okay? And some days you're like, yes, it's not attacking as badly as usual, and I feel normal. And I used to get it after one glass of wine. It would like settle the mind from kicking off at me.
Yeah.
It would just settle it. And I think, Paul, I want kids. I'm so happy. I thought I had this strange thing in my brain where I couldn't have kids, but I do want them, and I'd feel normal. And
Yeah.
I had those little spots like, oh, I'm normal, everything's great. And you'd have 2 weeks feeling normal, and then bang, straight back. Intrusive thought, it's all real, avoidance, horrendous, terror again.
Yeah.
And I think what happened is when I got pregnant, because I'm like, oh, come on, let's do this. I was in a bit of denial. I thought everything was gone. Because I was just constantly hiding from my brain. I was like, everything's great. And then I got pregnant. I was like, oh, maybe it's not. And I thought I need some therapy to help me. And then that's the time when I learned
Yeah.
about OCD.
Harley, what about you? What was that moment like when, how long had you been having intrusive thoughts, and what was that moment like when you were like, oh my God, like there are other people, this is a thing, like other people out there have this?
So POCD didn't latch until September of 2016, but I had always had like intrusive thoughts before I had POCD. But even then, I had no idea that the intrusive thoughts that I was having was OCD at the time. I literally had no idea what it was. And then it wasn't until when POCD latched that I did like a Google search. I know you shouldn't do that, but obviously at the time I was like really like anxious and like just so like everyone knows what that feeling of overwhelmness where you need to find out what's happening. So I Googled and I was reading the criteria for like POCD, and it was like I was reading, it was like I don't know how to explain it, but like it was almost as like I was reading the exact symptoms that I was having. It was almost just like someone had wrote down,
like reading your brain.
yeah, exactly.
Literally.
Yeah. And then obviously that you get a bit of temporary relief, but it didn't last at all. And then I would talk to people about it, but I would always like say, oh, I'm having intrusive thoughts. I wouldn't go into details of what thoughts I was having. I would always say, oh yeah, it's just intrusive thoughts that I'm having. I don't know how to deal with it. And I would always confide in people that I trust to get reassurance. It was all to get reassurance, but yeah, I didn't know it was OCD until yes, it latched September 2016. And then probably didn't realize it was OCD until maybe 6 months later, maybe to a
And
year.
how old
I'd
were
say.
you at the time?
I would have been early 20s, I'd say, when POCD latched. Yeah.
Okay. Sam, what about you? What was your moment of realization like?
Yeah, so with my personal experiences, because it's a theme where, you know, you've got the fear of rejection, that constant fear of if only they knew, and it's so easy just to feel so isolated and alone because you're just so scared to even mention it. Just even mention the word, it can seem absolutely terrifying. But to answer your question, if I go back to when I was about 18, I was on holiday with my girlfriend, and I've had these thoughts bombarding at unwanted times during sex, for example, and also latching on to relevant false memories in the past. And then I just sort of crumbled. Whether being on holiday played a massive part of that, because you're supposed to be enjoying this holiday, but all I can think about is this one thing in the past or this one thing during sex or anything like that. So it got me there, and then I had like a breakdown. And it was just spent the whole holiday. I feel really sorry for my girlfriend talking about this, because I spent the whole holiday just confessing and just asking for reassurance and just going back to the hotel room and just crying. And that's when I really knew I had a problem. And that was predominantly POCD. Just so scared. I was like, I can't deal with this on my own anymore. I just sort of need to just look, what is this? And then I didn't have a clue what OCD was. So my girlfriend said, look, search intrusive thoughts, because it sounds similar to that. And that was, I know we shouldn't Google, but when you first
No, you have to at the start. You have
Yeah.
to learn about what this is.
I mean,
like,
obviously,
you
when
have
you
to
have to
understand.
look for what it is and you want to like have awareness, obviously you have to Google.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So that was the main thing, intrusive thoughts, and it could be absolutely anything. And then that was like a big, oh wow, I'm not alone, and there's other people out there. So yeah, that was my main first point when I realised that I was suffering with POCD.
Just want to add to that, given that I'm older than you guys considerably, I imagine. Moment, I'm older than you, right? Much older than you. Are you 30?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 35.
I am 28.
You're
I am
28,
28. How
sorry. You're
old
just
are
very
you guys?
wise. I'm 35. How old are you guys?
I'm 26.
I'm 22.
You're
Wait, what?
22. Sam,
Yeah,
you're
did you not
so
know?
I don't
young.
believe you.
I'm not saying, you're
Guys.
just very wise. You're
I'm a-
very wise.
I'm a 2000 baby. I'm not even in the
Wow.
90s or the 80s.
So I wanted to make a point about age here, about how something that Rob often talks about on the channel is how fortunate we are to live in the time that we do. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, Harley, you suffered for 6 months before being able to Google and understand what you had. Whereas if you think that I developed OCD as a very young child in like the very early 90s, and then I was a teenager as the year 2000 turned and through the 2000s. So you didn't Google stuff. There was no such thing as that. You had to go, like, seriously, when I was in high school, you went to the library to research for projects. You had to look in books, and you, like, if the book was checked out, you physically couldn't study for your thing until the next week. So
Yeah.
I think that we have to be so appreciative that today what is available online is just unbelievably game changing. But
Yeah.
I imagine that if in 2018, when I found out about OCD, if I'd been 18, I would have found it then, because it's so normal to Google. But I don't think it's a coincidence that it took me such an awfully long time. So I kind of wish I
Yeah.
was younger. It's like I've lost my 20s.
No, and Jade, I feel like because even people who are younger than me, who are perhaps even around Sam's age or even younger than Sam, because now I feel like the generational gap is not as big as, for example, I have with my parents. Now, I mean, there are much faster changes that are happening in a shorter period of
Yeah.
time. So, like, so people who are around Sam's age or even younger than Sam, which isn't like much younger than me, they
Half
are,
my
because
age.
now, yeah. So basically, the generation now, or
You're old enough to be
growing
my
up
mum,
now,
Oh, hang on a minute. God, POCD, I'd have to be 13.
but they are extremely not only self-aware, but they're also very open about these things. So now you have all these popular songs, these pop songs, and these new artists coming up who often, when I listen to them, a lot of their songs mention intrusive thoughts. Whereas at the time that when we grew up, we didn't have any songs that ever mentioned the word intrusive thoughts. Like that was such a niche term, I would say.
We'd
But
never
now it's
heard it.
become
We
such a
never heard
popular
it.
thing.
And
like,
I saw
we
a
never
TikTok the other day, and it was like a banter between a millennial and a Gen Z, so like me and a Sam. And Sam is saying to me, like, how did you cope with your anxiety growing up? And I'm going, we didn't have a name for it back then. Like, it didn't exist. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't like, oh, our next door neighbour's daughter's struggling because she has anxiety. It was just, oh, next door, she's a bit loopy. There's something wrong with her. She's weird. She's not all there. There was no such thing. It just
but even
wasn't
now,
really
like
known.
years ago, we never even had things like World Mental Health Day or OCD Awareness Month, and all these things are coming to light now. And I think it's
So
good that people have. I think that's one of the things that I like social media, because like you're able to talk publicly about things and express how you feel, and like I think it's a good outlet to have, especially like with World Mental Health Day. It allows people to be vulnerable, even just for that one day. You can like see that, oh, I'm not the only one who's struggling. You know what I mean? Like there's other people out there. Because, and another thing with social media as well, I think a lot of people, like Instagram is all about like show your best and hide the rest. So I think people don't really want to show the
It's a good
bad thing.
thing.
Yeah, but and it's true, because it's all about putting up a front and like showing that, you know, oh, look at my life, I have no problems, blah blah blah. But going back to like stuff like World Mental Health Day, I think it's a really good thing to have. Even like OCD Awareness Week, just for that 1 week, you're able to just open up and express how you feel, even with people that you may not. It gives people a chance to express. They may not be able to express with people that they know because of how they. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to kind of explain. Do you understand what I'm trying to say though? Like,
yeah, just
Yeah,
on
no,
that
no,
point,
completely.
Yeah.
And like I feel like so growing up, I feel it never latched, but I had some incest OCD, like just sometimes pop in and just bother me, and I'd be like, what is this? And I just thought it was some Freudian stuff because because I also had some sexual dreams about family members and stuff, and it was like, is this what Freud was talking about? Is this the Freudian like stuff that happens with people? I don't know. But now obviously with having all this experience with OCD and understanding how OCD works, now I realize, oh, it was incest OCD trying to like, rear its head, but I'm kind of shocked it never like latched in a big way. Because I had chronic guilt and shame massively, and it did in a way that it attached itself to sexuality and sexual expression mainly. So I'm surprised it didn't, but I'm glad it didn't. But it did bother me in like many other ways, and it was difficult to talk about it or even like discuss it, because I thought I would come across as someone who was like a sexual deviant or like a sexual demon or something who wasn't fit for society.
Yeah, just on the point that Jade and Harley said about, having World Mental Health Day, and I'm suffering with anxiety, intrusive thoughts. But with this particular theme, it made me feel the exception. So it'd be like, oh no, theirs is just OCD. They've just got a bit of anxiety. They're suffering a bit of depression. But no, mine's different. Mine's
way
real.
worse.
And like that is the thing that kept me stuck for so long, just thinking I was the exception and how real it felt. And that's all just OCD's tricks there, isn't it? But yeah, that was the most scariest thing of that. No, they will go OCD and I haven't.
Yeah,
that was really, really scary.
What I really want to ask you
in.
guys. Sorry, go ahead, Jade.
I think that's where the additional layers of any kind of groinal responses or urges or upsetting, disturbing dreams take over. Because it's like, oh, I'm really suffering with anxiety, but I know it's just in my head. And then you're a bit like, oh, but everything feels so real to me. And everything, you felt like even weird around people with mental health issues. You'd think, I wish I was more like them. Not only jealous of people's brains who didn't have mental health issues, but like, oh, what I wouldn't give to just have depression. I know that sounds insensitive, but that's how it feels.
Yeah.
And I do remember, Sam, actually, and probably Harley, you'll remember, in the group chat a while ago, a couple of us were like, POCD is the worst theme. No one can say it's not the worst theme. And we had a really good debate about it with loads of the people. Someone was freaking out. I can't remember who. Someone who, like, maybe it was me back in 2019 when I was really unwell. I can't remember who. Someone was just so in such a bad way. And we're like, guys, I don't see how you can think that this isn't the worst theme. And we had a really good debate with people who had contamination or ROCD. And we all did come to the conclusion that because of the fact that it's just such a thing you just don't talk about, like with ROCD, you will talk about relationship issues with friends. It's normal. It's something you do. With harm and POCD, we were just, like you said, about that extra layer of shame. And like, there's no feeling like that chronic guilt and shame. I understand, though, that with things like ROCD, when cheating OCD is latched extremely hard and you genuinely feel like unfaithfulness is like the ultimate worst act. So it's similar in that way, but it's just a much less possible thing to talk about in the wider world. Like if you said to someone, I've been really scared I'm going to cheat on my husband, they're not going to be like, what did you just say? Whereas if you say something like to do with harm or POCD, it's like, what?
Yeah. And like I think the intensity of suffering across all themes is perhaps the intensity is the same, but there are some things with each theme that are slightly just different to that theme. So with POCD, for example, there is that extreme taboo element because like you feel that barrier to be able to discuss it with other people or even bring it up. And for me, for example, it was the absolute like the absolute removal of like the physical world around me, because I couldn't touch anything. I literally could not physically interact with anything at all. So I think each theme does have its slight differences that way. I do really want to ask you guys, because I think this is a very important thing to highlight, of your journey with doing exposures regarding POCD in that sense, because I know a lot of, like, whenever I speak to people, and because they're avoiding places like a school or a park, and they don't want to be around those areas, and when they do finally take this step and that risk in their head of actually doing that, it's like, oh, it's actually not as scary as I thought it would be, and it's not as bad, and maybe I don't need this tight control of like where I am and who I am around constantly. Maybe I can start to like live my life. So what was that like for you guys when it started to loosen up a bit, and where you started to feel like you didn't need to be clenched all the time that way? Harley, why don't you start, since you're a newcomer?
Well, it took me ages to even do my first exposure with POCD. It took me months, and this was while I was doing one-to-ones with Rob at the time. Like, it took me ages to start working on recovery properly. But and I remember, I've probably still got the messages now between me and Rob after I did my first exposure. I remember feeling like so like proud of myself for doing it, for taking that first step, because I've been avoiding for so long, and then I finally just went, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna do this. Whatever happens, happens. I'm just gonna do it. And I did the exposure, and it helped me see that without doing that exposure, I would still be in a bad place now. Like, that was, and I understand that exposures aren't everything, but for me, they were vital, because that doing the exposures was the stepping stone towards my recovery. But for me, and maybe you guys can relate to this, I'm sure you can, but for me, exposures started to become really compulsive for me. And I started to do them to start trying to get relief, instead of actually, like, whenever I'd feel discomfort, I would go and do the exposure to try and get any bit of relief. Whereas now, like, I've started to realize, oh, okay, this is self-reassurance in a way. But exposures to this day still help me. They've helped calm me down a lot. And yeah, like I said, I know they're not, they say that exposure is the gold standard. They're not. They're a big part of it for me, and they were a big part for my recovery journey. Like I said, they were the stepping stone. But yeah, I mean, you just feel a lot of empowerment and a lot of relief when you do that first exposure. That's how I felt anyway. But yeah.
So my two main exposures with POCD. Now, there's so much avoidance that it can leave you housebound if you let it. So being around kids, not avoiding public places, not avoiding family members' house, friends' house. Like, I remember just not going to people's houses because they'll have like a picture of a child up. It's just absolutely ridiculous. When I look back now, it's like, wow. But that shows the grip it had on me. So it's not saying no to going out to your friends, not saying no to going to someone's birthday party. Like, I could be around kids now all day and I'd be fine. It's just, that's because I don't avoid anymore. I've trained the brain that there's nothing scary there. It was just a perceived threat. So that was the main exposure of avoidance. The other one is, when you break down the fears, is like the fear of social rejection, fear of being disapproved of. And that's just things like making yourself look a bit of a tit in public. So, for example, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, I guess I have. But like walking through a high street, I've said it before, walking through a high street with a cap on sideways, asking for extra small condoms, really loud in a Boots, like a pharmacy shop we've got in UK. I don't know if all over the world, but just things like that, just making yourself a bit uncomfortable. And that helps with the fear of, the links into POCD, of being rejected, being hated, being like an outcast. So yeah,
I was just reflecting on Sam saying about being housebound as well and like that stuff. And before I get to this answer, like it's also reminded me of that conversation that we all had about what theme's the worst and that ridiculous conversation. Like what you just said, Momin, like that was one of the points raised as well, was like, at least with POCD, you can escape triggers. Whereas if you're in like existential or is it the other one, somatic or contamination, you can end up in a position where you cannot escape. And it was interesting how, you know, there's so many different angles to different, and I just almost forgot, Sam, when you said about being housebound, like I was never fully housebound, but my life was bound in the routes I had to take. Even if, like you said about seeing a picture of a child in someone's house, if there was currently an advertising campaign that was on bus stops, like, you know, big ad campaigns, I would have to walk past different bus stops.
TV shows, films. I
couldn't, it was very censored. Yeah, like everything becomes censored, which at the time you don't realize makes it grow. So I remember a particular time where I was so locked in avoidance that my whole like I said, my route to work was very specific. When I was at work, where I sat was specific. If someone new turned up at the office, I'd be literally shaking, worrying what photo they would pin up onto their desk.
Wow, I can relate to that so much. That is crazy, man. And
freaking out if they put a photo up that triggered me. One meeting, my boss walked in and he had an image on his mug that just said, "Love you, Dad." And I freaked and I had to leave the meeting. And it was just it got to a point where anything that reminded me of that, of children in any context, was utterly send me into a spiral. And it's just amazing how locked in we can get. So yeah, my whole life was locked in. And I remember one particular time, one of my safe zones was eating out with friends and having wine in a restaurant in the evening, because you're not likely to see anyone, any children, you're not going to get triggered. And we went to a birthday meal in this brasserie, a steakhouse, and everyone was there and I was all excited, just going to have my wine. And then one of the guests in them said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind, I brought my daughter." And I ran to the toilet. I was sick 7 times. And I was like, "I'm so sorry, guys. I got to go home. I just don't feel right." Got home in my safe zone, put friends on, perfect, fine again. And it's just like, but in those days, I just convinced myself, oh, I just get stomach bugs a lot, because I didn't want there to be an issue. So if anyone said, "What's wrong, Jade?" "Oh, nothing, like I'm fine," because I didn't want to go there again. But just in terms of exposure, I only wanted to mention those because of what was mentioned. But for me, exposures didn't bring relief for a very long time. It was so deeply entrenched. It'd been so long that I'd been so terrified that it was hundreds of exposures before I even started to feel like this would be worth it. Like in Christmas 2019, I'd be messaging the group like, "I can't do this anymore. I physically cannot live doing these exposures. This is not, like, I can't sustain this." And I'm not talking like, it wasn't extensive. It was like, go and sit at a park on your own for 20 minutes at a time, 3 times a week, or bath your children every night for a week instead of once a week, or, you know, don't do rumination compulsions whilst nappy changing. It was stuff like that. But, you know, because when you think about it, if you only realize you've got POCD when you're pregnant, like, in a way, it's awesome, isn't it? Because I was thrown into the deep end. Like, there was no escape. It was 24 hours a day.
That's the ultimate exposure.
Yeah, to go from you're unable to see a picture on a billboard to you now live with your fear 24 hours a day. Like,
yeah,
it's just, and the second that she was born, bang, you this is not going to work. Like, this is not going, you're not going to be able to do this. Terror. It was just unbelievable. So I do often urge people in my videos that if you're suffering with POCD and you have a deep desire to be a parent, you should definitely do it. Just a second, guys.
And I think, like, one of the things that two things that are coming to my mind is that whenever I'm speaking to, sorry, you're about to say something, Jade?
The craziness burst into the room.
Okay.
What was I saying though? I can't remember the flow that I was talking about. It's just
so
how
I
was I saying about how long I had to do exposures for before I felt okay, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I just want to take a couple of points of what you said and just highlight those really strongly, because I think number one, I think when people are trying to dispute or work on acceptance of like their worst case scenario with this theme or with harm OCD as well, because that's also something people think is very controversial. I always want to highlight to people that it's not necessarily the theme itself. It's mostly about what will happen as a result of that. So, like Sam said, there's social rejection, there's people judging you, losing your loved ones, being in jail, which is like a very unhappy setting for many people. At least that's how we perceive it. And so when we actually realize that those are our core fears and that's what needs to be broken down, we also start to realize, and this is, I think, ever since I've joined the WhatsApp groups and spoken to other people, this is across the board, that it's not just this one thing where their fears come in. So people who have like a fear of social rejection, they would also be very people pleasing. They would not like to say no to friends. They would not like to displease their friends or do anything to upset anyone. So, and I think that's really important to highlight because it can give us that slight light bulb moment and that realization that this is not just related to OCD, this is actually spilling over into so many other areas of my life with so many other interactions that I have in relationships in my life. And the other important thing that I really also wanted to talk about is exposures, because I personally think, at least with my personal experience and in trying to and talking to other people about it as well, I think the intention with which you're doing the exposure also really counts. Because if you're doing the exposure to prove something to yourself, then it doesn't work as an exposure, because the intention behind it is that, oh, I'm going to prove to myself that it's just OCD, or
It
that
shows
I'm
you're
going to
still
prove
scared.
that I do have control.
It
Sorry, what?
just, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mum, but by doing that, by doing exposure to chase relief, it shows you're still scared of what. Yeah, it still shows you're still scared if you're
Exactly.
chasing exposure to get relief. So,
And then
kind of.
more often than not, what people are also do is that when they do an exposure, because like on paper that's what needs to be done, an exposure, but then when they do the exposure, they're like, okay, I've done what I was supposed to do. Is the anxiety still there? Is it gone? Am I better? Is my fear level down? And so that immediate checking that, oh, I've done the right thing, now where's my anxiety, now where's the relief, why is it coming? And so I think those things can also, like, I'm not saying, Jade, that was what you were doing.
No,
but I'm
no,
just
I
saying
know.
these are
Yeah.
also, like, common potholes that people fall into when doing exposures
It's
as
really
well.
common. And the other one is, if you still need, say you've got a therapist or a life coach, if you're saying, do I still need to do this exposure? Is that enough now? The answer is no, because until you're not scared to do it, it still needs work. So for example, now bath time is my favorite part of the day with my children. It's gone from being the biggest fear of my life to, oh, it's so much fun, because I just associate it with like my kids having a laugh and like they love the water and it's just fun. So it's definitely, I think people underestimate just how many exposures are needed. You can hear people say, oh, I tried exposure therapy, but it just didn't work for me. And it's like, well, it's just that it's so much more intensive than people realize. I think I did 8 to 12 months of like pretty intensive exposure programs where I'd have check-in with life coaching and like, right, my new assignments, I'll watch these 3 documentaries over the next 2 weeks, bath the kids every night, don't avoid anything, go to the park 3 times a week, and like also read these articles that you're really scared of, and until you're not scared of them, and also just detaching. I think exposures sometimes, like you said about chasing relief, they need to be, you do them, and everything that comes in, you got to allow it. There's no, oh, I hope this, oh yes, it's okay, everything's fine. It's like, bring it on. Like you can't, anxiety can't harm me. Whatever happens, and behind the scenes working on the rational thinking and the irrational beliefs, so that over time I found the two sort of started to unlock each other. But it was particularly tough. Like I had other themes that unlatched a lot quicker with rational thinking and exposure work. this one was.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it was always my main theme. Like I've had ROCD pretty bad, but I'm nowhere near the scale of POCD
Well, in
was.
some ways, it does feel like the ultimate form of absolute social rejection, all your worst fears coming true. In some ways, it seems like the ultimate realization of those fears. So Jade, before your kids like really start to, I think, ask for you, I think let's like go towards wrapping up this video. Since you three are like patrons of POCD on the channel, what one by one, like Harley, we can start with you, then Sam, then Jade. Like, what would you like to just leave people with who are suffering from POCD right now and they can't tell whether it's real or it's OCD and they're just absolutely petrified? What would you say to them?
One thing I would say is don't give up hope. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. If you can find a good OCD coach, you've got to find someone who specializes in OCD to really help get under your beliefs and your core fears. And just know that if we can all get there, then so can you.
Yeah, it's just that there is hope. You can get better. We've been in your shoes. We know how the suffering feels. It feels relentless. It feels so intense for 24/7. The minute you wake up, the minute you go to bed, just scanning or just trying to find something that it can latch. So yeah, there is hope. There's so much content on here, webinars, one-to-ones. There's just so much help out there. You're really not alone. But one point I'd like to go into, just to elaborate on, is what I find with POCD, it also links into fear of fear so much. Now, because you know how bad you once were, so let's say you're a bit better, you might be working on your beliefs, you might just be bringing it for the ride, you could be coasting. So you're a bit better, and then you know what you're like, you know how it can suddenly get you, and then you start thinking about that, and then that internal thermometer, seeing how you feel. So that's a really sneaky one with me, constantly checking how do you feel.
Yeah, me too.
Is it coming back? Oh shit, I can't feel like that again. Oh shit, I've got a holiday next week. Please don't come back then. So that fear of fear. So, but the biggest advice is working on the beliefs and the unconditional acceptance. Remembering acceptance isn't agreement, but that's been an absolute lifesaver, game changer for me. The unconditional acceptance with POCD gets under the main fear of and the chronic guilt in the background. All right, 'cause there's only so many exposures that can be done. Very helpful, but to get under the fear is applying the unconditional acceptance persistently.
Yeah, and I think that all makes so much
You have the
sense,
last
doesn't it?
word.
Because, like, I have the last word. Brilliant. Welsh having the last word.
Right, bye-bye, I'm off.
I'll just put the dragon a bit closer next time.
Where's the England shirt?
So I would say I love the point about acceptance is not agreement, because I remember the first time that unconditional self-acceptance was mentioned to me as a concept, and I was like, that's ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. But I think the point is that, you know, whatever your fear is a reality for someone in the world who is still living and existing. And so we're certainly not making peace with it's cool if it's all true. If everything I'm fearing in my brain is true, it's cool. It's much more about, I really wouldn't like that. But if this fear were true, whatever it is, there would be nothing I could have done about it in the sense of this is how my brain ended up. So it's kind of just understanding the logistics of the mind in that way and becoming less irrational, like our society is. It talks about, you know, evil people who are in jail or monsters and stuff, but it's like, it's people who ended up a certain way and committed certain acts. It's a lot to get our head around at the start, because we're certainly not comfortable with or condoning any of the horrendous behaviors and actions that people undertake in their life, but it's turning down the terror. And I often in my videos talk about this idea of training our mind to respond to fears the same way a person without OCD would respond. So like if it's unbelievable. So if you tell this to a harm OCD mum, my friend one day said, my kids are driving me so mad, I'm literally going to chuck one of them out the window if someone doesn't come here and like look after them. And it was so interesting because she was like, oh, I feel a bit guilty because I genuinely I just wanted to lash out on my kids. Like I just felt this anger inside me. And I was like, that's a normal reaction in your brain to something that you just randomly felt and thought. But a person with OCD would fall into a 6-month, year-long spiral, and that would be a real event to them, because it's like, I actually wanted to hurt my child. It was real. It wasn't just thought. Like, so I think what we're doing is we're training our brain. If I said to that mum, oh, what if you hurt your kid that time and you ended up in prison? They'd go, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. I'm glad I didn't. Do you see how they've just got this natural response? And I think that's what unconditional self-acceptance helps us to do, is that our brain doesn't react normally to fears. We have a malfunction in our brain that when it spots a threat and a fear goes, wah. Whereas other people's brains don't do that. So we're training our brain not to do that and showing there's nothing to fear here. And like I said, the first time that I saw unconditional life acceptance work for me was with raw chicken. I applied, because it was such a low level OCD fear, I applied it and it immediately unlatched, and I never even thought about it again, to the point where I pretty much have eaten raw chicken in the last couple of years. I used to be terrified that people would get ill if I served them chicken that wasn't cooked. And I would whip the plates away and over microwave it and have panic attacks that they're all going to get ill. As soon as I made peace with, I don't want to make my family ill. I don't want to be responsible for people in hospital on a drip, seriously unwell. But if it happened, it would have been out of my control, and I'm not going to live my life overcooking chicken because it tastes gross. And it just unlatched.
Imagine you 80 years old. Imagine you 80 years old saying, you know what, I overcooked chicken and that is my biggest achievement my entire life.
Yeah, like that's the best thing that's ever happened, is that I can now have juicy, perfectly cooked chicken. But it just goes to show, that's what showed me that the concept works, because it's not about every time I get a fear, I go, it's okay, because if it happened, it wouldn't be a big deal. It's not that. That is a compulsion. And that's where people misunderstand unconditional self and life acceptance. They think, aren't you just telling your brain that it's not, and that's a compulsion? And it's not that. It's your brain truly finally believing that your fears are not as scary as you imagine. That's why no one's walking around terrified of it, apart from people with OCD. Like, I'm not scared of getting unwell. I've actually got some really bad abdominal pains this week that I'm like, that could well be cancer, you know, because that actually feels really odd. But I'm not even remotely scared, because I'm like, I hope it isn't, probably isn't. I'll check it out at some point. I'll probably forget for a month. But someone with severe health OCD, they're going to be scanning the abdomen for, they'd have already been to the doctor. And you see, it's just that we're training our brain to see the world like someone who like a person who would have an intrusive thought about their, you know, sibling or child or something and go, oh, that was weird, and move on. But we're putting little sticky notes on them and making them important and becoming obsessed. So my biggest piece of advice to POCD sufferers is just to echo what Harley and Sam said, like, you're definitely not alone. But if you want to wake up in the morning feeling just airy, that's how I describe how I wake up in the morning. I just feel air, I feel fresh, I feel rested, I'm looking forward to the day. That's all I ever wished for. Like, that was all I needed. I used to say, if I could just sit down in a park or on the beach and just read my book with not a care in the world, that would be my life made. And so when you think about that, like the depth of like happiness you can get from something so simple once you're on the other side is like, no one else will experience that. My friends are like, what's wrong with you? We're just sitting here. This is boring. And I'm like, it's not, it's amazing. You don't understand.
Yeah.
The gratitude, isn't it?
Yeah,
That
I think
freedom.
Yeah, I think when the clouds clear, you start to actually appreciate even the little things in life, because you weren't able to do even the little things before. And so you start to find joy in even the smallest acts, which I think is such a big silver lining of this recovery journey.
Yeah, and just remember that it takes a long time. Don't give up. Like, after every 6-month chunk, I'd be like, it's not getting better. It's not getting better. And I think for me, the journey now, and I think Sam touched on this, the journey now is upkeep, because I think I went through a phase of thinking, well, I'm better now, so I don't even have to, I'm like everyone else now. I don't need to do anything at all, but I am at risk at times of the fear of fear coming in. So every now and then my brain goes, what if it comes back? you're a bit overwhelmed at the moment, you're not sleeping. And I then remind myself that I have to keep, in terms of upkeep, I don't do exposure programs anymore. I don't sit down and dispute irrational beliefs as homework, but I think making peace that we have OCD, like our brain is a brain with OCD, and we're just going to need to maintain having a healthy brain system, so that, because we'll always be at risk of things coming back in. But that is by no means me saying I'm coasting or that the suffering's still there.
Yeah.
I don't feel any chronic anxiety or
And
guilt anymore
I
at all.
I think that at the point where I think all four of us are at this point, I think it also then at this point you don't feel the need to sit down on paper and dispute and do those things. If you do, that's also fine. I mean, there's no harm in it. But I feel like at this point, then it becomes second nature to think rationally, and it doesn't feel that much of an effort unless you have like a major setback. Then obviously, okay, you need a bit more effort. But largely, I think it becomes second nature, and you're able to deal with even like life problems in a much better fashion and a much more level-headed fashion than you would before. So yeah.
Can I just say a point on, if you are already on into the journey and you're suffering with POCD? Now we're talking about beliefs, so you work on that as you get further down the line. But the first thing I would do is, when you feel that urge to confess or to ask for reassurance, that just needs to stop. It's like an addiction, so
it's an easy win, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just sort of getting it off your chest. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And that was what got me in so bad with that trap. So just see it as like a drug. Just need to come off of it, and just, it's, as you work on your beliefs, you're not going to feel the need to confess or ask for reassurance anymore. But that's the first thing you can do when you feel so chronic guilt or chronic shame ramped up. Just try and sit with those feelings and then look at those beliefs. But yeah,
the same with avoidance, isn't it? The same with avoidance. Just commit to yourself.
Yeah, because it's so easy just to feel like running away, isn't it? Or
and I think this is why the reading list is so good. The reading list is so good because it helps you to make peace with extreme suffering is something you can endure. So I used to be so terrified of being so badly triggered that I'd avoid things, whereas like I'm not avoiding, because wasting my life in OCD's grip is worse than feeling terror all day, every day in facing the fears. And I think once you get to the point where you go, it is going to be horrendous at that party, it's going to be really difficult, I'm going to be really upset, but I'm going anyway because I'm not letting OCD control me anymore. I'm not doing it.
Yeah,
exactly.
And just like not avoiding, not confessing, no matter how bad it feels.
Isn't it? Taking that leap.
And that the Paul David book.
The uncertainty.
The Paul David book at Last Alive, isn't it? It's so great for saying I will live with anxiety. Yeah, it's amazing.
No, it just blew my mind. And I think it did so much for me, not just in terms of understanding anxiety, but also just giving up the internal analysis and chase all the time. I think if I hadn't read that book, I wouldn't have had that catalyst for my recovery journey. That book just is amazing. Yeah.
I got friends who have recovered from just reading the book, not with OCD, just they're suffering with really bad anxiety, and then they literally are better. From reading that book. Obviously it was way stickier for us, but that book did teach me that no matter how much anxiety is thrown at you, you can live alongside it. But interestingly, once you don't mind it being there, it doesn't stick around for long, because anxiety is there to keep you safe, and if you're not bothered about it, it just starts to dissipate, but it does take time.
Harley, do you have a favorite book, by the way, from the list?
Probably what's it called? The Myth of Self-Esteem, that one. Especially is it chapter 4? Psychotherapy and the Value of a Human? That one, that one. I always go back to that chapter all the time.
If anyone struggles to read that book, I really recommend just listening to Albert Ellis on a couple of his YouTubes first. Because he's really strange, if I'm going to be mean, how he talks about things. He's got an odd voice, and he talks in a strange way. If you hear him over a few videos, it's easier to read the book because he writes how he talks, and usually you're like, what am I reading? I can't follow this.
I think he has very run-on sentences, so I think that's what sometimes really there's a lot of commas, semicolons, and there can be like 8 lines of just one sentence, I think. So I think that's what sometimes feels a bit intense that way while reading it. But I think just like with any other book as well, or any other writing style, I think it takes a while to get used to that writing style. But otherwise, I think the concepts, again, like Hardy also said, there's amazing concepts in there. All right, guys, I think on that note, let's end this video. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I think this was a lovely chat and such a relief to not have Nick today, just having a break from.
And it's his birthday as well, so he deserves a day off, really.
I think, happy birthday, Nick, by the way.
Yeah, happy
I
birthday,
mean,
Nick.
we love you. We wish
Sorry.
you were here, kind of, but I mean, kind of. Anyway, all right, guys, have a great rest of the day and night.
too.
Actually, we're in like closer time zones, so it's nighttime on your end as well, I think.
We're all
Yeah.
the same.
So,
7:30.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Momin.
Yeah, thank you, Mum.
Okay. All right, bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Okay, guys.